Frankie,
Ian, I can't say son of a bitch anymore, but you
you
son of a
just
bitch.
you just did. You just did. I've asked Frank because he always calls me a son of a bitch. I've asked him not to do that because there's a very real likelihood that my mom is going to listen and watch all these videos, and I think she's going to get tired of being repeatedly called that name, even though Frank is not doing that by any stretch of the imagination.
We
So
love you, Mama
I've
Matthews.
asked him to think of new insults to start this show with, to call me because he has plenty. He just doesn't usually bring them all out when we do podcasts.
I don't know if you know this, Ian. Being a Neanderthal descendant is one of the main things that can cause you to get the coronavirus. I'm a prime candidate to catch it. I'm only
100%.
the fourth generation of my family that's walking upright.
100%. So we are in the midst of the baseball playoffs right now, and we are going to kick this show off, which this entire show is going to be about regrets, how to deal with them, where they stem from, how they impact our motivation. But we're going to start with Hank Aaron. So anyone who is a fan of baseball, if you grow up in baseball and you pay attention to any statistics, by any measure, Hank Aaron is a top 5 baseball player of all time. Just some stats on Hammer and Hank. One, you had to be living under a rock to not know that Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. But outside of that, there's a lot more. So he's the career baseball record leader in runs batted in. He had 2,297 extra base hits, total bases. He's top 5 career in hits, runs, and he's one of only 4 players to have at least 17 seasons with 150 or more hits. He made it to 21 consecutive All-Star games. He's won a league MVP. There's really nothing on Hank Aaron's, on his resume. There's no gap. There's no gap over a long period of time. He consistently was one of the best players in the league every single year. He garnered MVP votes in more than half of the seasons that he played in. And the reason why we're starting with all that and drilling home all of those statistics, he was asked after his career was over. I think this might have been around the time where he was getting enshrined into the Hall of Fame, to summarize his career. And the first thing out of his mouth, not all of that stuff that he was proud of, was, I just felt like there was something missing in my career. I felt like if I had done what I was supposed to do, I could have won at least 1 or 2 triple crowns. And that just would have been something. And I have different opinions when I think about that quote, especially stacked onto the staggering accomplishments that he had in the sport. But I guess I'll start with you and what you take away from Hammer and Hank having regrets in his career that he didn't do as much as he should have.
So there's a couple things I think about. The first thing I think about when you hear someone with those statistics and incredible bio lines is, as a younger person, I would have said you probably need to be easier on yourself. And I think you're pushing yourself too hard. But if you do something, especially in sports at a very high level, I don't think you ever get there unless you have a massive chip on your shoulder and there's something that pushes and drives you. And I think most of the people who are listening to this are probably not going to the gym to shoot 2,000 free throws today. Most of us are business people who want to succeed or build a business. If you want to have a statue erected with you swinging a baseball bat, I think you have to have this. But I actually think back to something that is somewhat different. Like, I think about like my drive as a 20-year-old versus my drive as a 45-year-old and how hard I was on myself. And you have to realize kind of where happiness is and what we want to accomplish. And I think you have to kind of divorce yourself from being in the throes of it and pulling yourself to the side and saying, what do I really want out of this? But if you're a Major League Baseball player, I don't think you have that ability.
So I'm slightly different with you on this, in that I find that the older I get, the more relaxed I am about things that I came up short on in my career.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, um, every failure seemed to be like career defining. And when I say failure, I'm talking about like, I missed my sales number this month.
Yep.
Like something like, oh my God, I forecast $400,000 in February and I only did 100. What a disaster. My career's over. And you regret it. Like you lock in on it and you can get frozen on it. And the older I've got, the more I've realized stuff like that just doesn't really matter and no one remembers anyway.
Yep.
So small things I don't remember. I, I will say I agree with you on when I look at, you don't, is there a bigger record in all of sports, Frank, than Babe Ruth's home run record? Like just a statistical number. I'm not talking about championships, but like a record, a number record, one that you would pop out more in your mind?
If you said like, if you just asked me like, what are the best records in sports? I would probably go to wins. I would probably go to Wooden as a coach. I'd probably go to like Bill Russell or like a LeBron James or Michael Jordan. I would think about championships. And that was one of the things I didn't ask you, but I was curious of. He said Triple Crown in that quote, but was it championship? Is that what was missing for him? Or was it just that he thinks that he can string something together well enough? I'm curious of that.
So Triple Crown is just another individual statistical. It's
Right.
you lead the league in RBIs, home runs, and batting average. So, it was more kind of individual piece of it. But for me at least, baseball is so filled with statistics. We know that Babe Ruth hit 61 home runs. Everyone knows that growing
Right.
up. You don't know the highest points total ever, maybe other than Wilt Chamberlain had 100 points.
That's right.
So to me, the home run record is hallowed ground. That is, someone who could beat Babe Ruth's home run record, because until that happened for 50 years, he was the home run king. That's
right.
What Babe Ruth
Usually these things happen about every decade. And that record was there for 40, 50 years before Maris broke it in 61.
Yeah. So to break that, so when I look at this, okay, this is a person who is incredibly hard on himself and has incredibly high expectations. And so I look at, you don't break a 50-year-old record from a legend by having low expectations of yourself. That's not going to be an individual that seems to let things slide. That I bet that was a guy who would look every day at every game and agonize over, I can't believe I took that second pitch. I should have hit that over the left field fence. What is like, I think to be excellent, you have to hone in on every little thing, and you're always iterating and trying to get a little better, finding a little edge. So when I look at that quote, I think it's consistent with greatness. I don't think you could be like, nah, that's about all. I don't think person wired like that. That doesn't sound like Kobe Bryant. That doesn't sound like Jordan. That doesn't sound like people that we look up to that are hyper competitors with success. I think it's consistent with the numbers he put up. That stuff doesn't happen by accident or because you're a freak athlete, which he was. He was
clearly
athlete.
Both.
Yeah.
So I for a broader audience, I think there's something that you have to think about, right? I don't think Hank Aaron was great. I think he was either generational or iconic. So what do you want to be? Do you want to be iconic or do you want to be great? In the business world, to be iconic, you're Jack Welch. To be iconic, you're, I don't know, Bill Gates.
Steve Jobs,
right? But to be great, you can still be a millionaire and be great. You can still have an incredible life. You can still coach your Little League baseball team and tell all your friends you're retired, even though you really aren't, because that's your goal, because you were great. To be iconic, it's something different. So what I think about with this, about regrets, as a younger person, I would have felt like I was missing out. Like I'd have regrets that I didn't have regrets, if that makes sense. Like I would read something about a sports figure and think, damn, I wish I had that passion, or I wish I had that success, or I wish that. But as an older person, when I look at it's very different. I look at it and say, wow, that person was able to harness these things and accomplish that great stuff. That's beautiful. That's like a piece of art. That's like a Michelangelo, which we're going to talk about in a second. But it isn't me. I get to pay $50 for a ticket. I get to sit and have a hot dog and I get to watch it because that is something magical and that should be celebrated. But it's very different than I should hold myself to that standard, which is something that I would have beat myself up over as a younger person.
I also think when you look at it, I don't know how to judge how hard Hank Aaron should be on himself because I played baseball. I wasn't as good as Hank Aaron. I didn't grow up with that kind of skill. So when I look at his stats, I'm like, I would have killed to have one at bat in the major league. So when I look at him, I'm like, take it easy, dude. You're a killer. But I don't know what it's like to have Hank Aaron's body, his hand-eye coordination, his eyesight, his skill. So how can I judge how he should feel about what he accomplished?
Let me ask you this. As a younger person, would you have felt compelled if you bumped into Hank Aaron? Would you feel, clearly you wouldn't say it, but would you feel compelled to tell him your opinion? And as an older person, do you kind of just admire it?
Yeah, I think if I'd have run into Hank Aaron anytime, I would have been speechless because he's Hank Aaron,
Right.
and he's kind of godly to someone who grew up playing baseball. But I don't. I guess I just look at that and think, how in the world could I know how to judge? I know now to look at it like this. When I was younger, I wouldn't have known that only Hank Aaron knows how good Hank Aaron could be. And so when
That's
Hank
right.
Aaron's like, I left something on the table, he knows how damn good he was and how much easier the game was to him than it was to other people. And so he knows what he could have accomplished. Whereas to an average player, they'd be like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like you're an icon. But he knew what he was capable of.
So let's ground this in a way, right? Let's say as managers, if you come across someone who's incredibly hard on themselves, like let's say you have someone who works under you that is just incredible, and we both dealt with that, but they're really hard on themselves. What do you do as a seasoned manager? What do you do? Like learning from, like we learned from Hank Aaron, what do you do with that person?
I think giving them perspective is important. I think someone who's really hard on themselves, a lot of times top performers, they're not paying attention to everyone else. They're top performers because they come in every day and they focus like hell on what they need to do that day to be great. And they're not looking at other people. They're not talking, they talk to them, but they don't know how those other folks feel. And I think perspective is helpful every once in a while to show them something like this. If IJ's having a tough day, my son in baseball, like let's say he has a bad game, he goes 0 for 3 and he strikes out, he has a bad day and he's just really down on himself. I will show him a longer period of, yeah, you had a tough game, but let's look at your last 5 games. Look at how many hits you had, how many runs you knocked in, and let's look at your teammates, what they did over that time. Do you know how many people on this team would kill to have your last 5 games? So I think sometimes, Frank, it's showing them a little more perspective because they're stuck in the weeds and they can't see the forest. And so showing them that other people in their job would kill for their results or would love it to come as easy as it does for them. I think that helps sometimes, that a top performer tends to lose perspective because they're so used to being good that their standard is so much different than everyone else's. And that's the only standard they're looking to live up to.
So that's what I wanted to dive into a bit, right? Let's just say you have someone, they don't want to be 7th out of 300. They want to be number 1. And they got the chops and they have the ability. What I have noticed in some instances is this: it's really important for you to help them with everything you just said, remind them, show them, make it relevant. But the other thing is this: I can see inside of you that you do not want me to hold you to anything else other than the standard that you want to hold yourself to, which is to be the absolute best. I think you can do it. I don't think you should drive yourself nuts. And I think you're going to be better faster if you round off those edges and you're not so hard on yourself. When you're having an average month, realize there's another month behind it, and then stack those things. Round off the bottom edges. Don't have those times or months or at bats where you bottom out. And then that's when your greatness can come through. And that to me is so critical, because if you do, it's so rare that you find someone who's incredible. When you find someone who's incredible, I don't want to perjure them with my opinion of what they're capable of.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a quick example on this. So I think this is important for a really, really high achiever, top performer. So at GE, when I started in my sales account package, I was like 112th out of 112. I was dead last. I had almost no orders. They gave me just a crappy account package. And in 2 years, I got up into the top 20. But I was that guy that was like 19th, and Mac was 1, and it drove me nuts. Like, I was like, this sucks. I'm a loser. I'm not as good as him. But in 2 years, I had passed, 100 people. And I remember this. So my boss was like, give yourself a break. It's unreal what you've done. Look how far you've come. I didn't want to hear that shit. I wanted to be 1. So I would be like, I'm not looking for you to soft pedal this. Look me in the eyes and tell me why I'm not 1. I don't want to feel good about being 19th. I'm not wired that way. I want to know what it takes to be 1. And he was like, all right, do you want to know? You waste too much time on small accounts. You love your little accounts. You love prospecting. You love running around to small customers that can give you 50,000 at a time, but that's a waste of time. Mac has 3 huge accounts, and he is deep, and he goes and gets $1 million and $2 million deals, and you don't ever close those. You do it by running around, and you'll never be Mac unless you can go find. And it cut through the bullshit.
That was great feedback.
And he was like, you're not in BP Amoco. You're not in ExxonMobil. You're not in, and he named like 5 huge accounts he knew were in Chicago. He's like, they spend more than your whole account package together, and you just avoid them because it's more work and you'd rather go close your little ones. And I was like, that's what I need to hear. Thanks. I want to be 1. And you just gave me some biting criticism of what number 1 was doing that I wasn't. I'm willing to do it. Like, take Kobe Bryant. If Kobe Bryant is the 7th best player, and he was to ask a coach, how do I be 1? He'd be like, here's what Jordan does. He gets into the gym at 4 a.m. Kobe Bryant would be like, I'll be there at 3:30, because that's who he is. But he might need that feedback of, here's something that you can control, that you should do, that can get you to where you want to go. Instead of soft pedaling, trying to make me feel good about not being 1. If that's all I care about is being number 1, someone who's a high achiever like that wants to hear the path. So show them the path. If you want to know it, here's what it takes.
And kind of like you and I can't judge Hank Aaron. We can't tell him how he should feel. We can't tell a top performer how they should react. At that very moment, that GE manager told you, do these things if you want to be number 1. And then they gave you the tools. And then it's up to you to then turn that into something. You were still having a fine career. But if you want, so as a manager, you need to listen to what your employee wants and give it to them. And if they do want to hold themselves to that high caliber, don't pull them back. Give them the tools.
That's right. And there's going to be plenty of people that are really proud of being top 20 out of 120. If you're a career salesperson, that wasn't me at the time. I didn't want to be a career salesperson, but top 20, they're making money, they're doing great, and they're happy with that. For me, I didn't want to be told 19 was fine. Don't tell me that crap. Tell me how I can get to the next level. That's what I want. And those are the best people to manage, by the way. Like, those are the best people to challenge, to manage, and my manager was really good at reminding me of where Mac was every month. And because he knew it would just get me to work a little harder and think a little different.
We're kind of getting to the end of Hank Aaron here. We're going to move on to something else, but I want to tell a quick story. I'm a part of a mastermind group, and now I'm in the leadership team of this mastermind group. But when I first started this mastermind group, I was just a paying member. I was just, I was a young kid, just kind of in the mastermind. There was a guy in that mastermind who was on the founding team of Kodak, like founder, like rich as hell, did just fine. He had 3 sons who all wanted to be professional basketball players. And this guy had retired early, so he went to practice and got to watch all the practices and saw all the stuff. But he sat down with his sons, and one of them particularly was talented. And the kid thought he wanted to play in the NBA. And the father was encouraging him, never said a word. The son came up to him sometime after high school. He could dunk, he had offers, and he goes, Dad, I don't think I want to play in the NBA. I think I want to be in business. And the dad goes, are you sure? And he says, yeah, I'm sure. He goes, are you positive? He goes, yeah, I'm positive. He goes, I can't change your mind. He goes, no. He goes, great. Can I give you my opinion? And the son said, sure. And he goes, I think it's a great decision. He goes, do you know how good you have to be the 12th person on the bench of an NBA team? Like now we're in Europe and we're in Asia and they find people in Africa. Like you've got to be like 300 out of 7 billion, which is a really hard life. Do you know what it takes to be a millionaire in business? The margin is so much greater. So as you're listening to this, if you're young, you're trying to pick your career path, or you're trying to pick, do I become a startup owner or one of these things, you can build one hell of an incredible life without being Hank Aaron. And there's a lot of happy landing places in the middle there. If you do want greatness, that's great too. But there's also a lot of great spots that are off ramps between here and there.
Yeah, think about let's go back to that 300 people out of 7 billion. If you want to be top 10% earners in this country, what are probably making 350 to 400,000?
It's roughly 400 grand.
Okay, so that's 30 million people in America are making 400 grand. 30 million. You're just trying to get into the 30 million. That's not anywhere near as difficult as playing a professional sport. And it's not that difficult if you put the energy in, if you put the time in. That's not a real big number. So I love that piece of it. So moving off of sports, totally different. So talking about regret. So Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo lived around the same time during the Renaissance, both genius level intellects by far. If you've ever seen any of their work up close, it's outrageous that humans could build what they did without machines, especially some of the sculptures, everything else. Leonardo is interesting. Very hard guy to define. He was a great artist, of course, but you could call him a scientist, a mathematician, an engineer. He was an inventor. He's a painter, a sculptor. Mona Lisa, yes, incredible. He invented scissors. He invented parachutes. He came up with a glider decades before anyone built a real flying machine. And it was pretty close.
Centuries.
It was pretty close. It was pretty close to what ultimately worked. He just didn't have time to go jump off a cliff.
500 years early.
Yes. He pretty much invented a tank, literally hundreds of years before a real tank was built, because there was no combustion engine when he was around, but he came up with the idea of it. He has work in human anatomy, crazy, all the kind of stuff that Leonardo da Vinci was in to make the world a better place. And on his deathbed, he's quoted as saying, "I've offended God by not working more on my art as I should have done." So, he confided with his assistant at the time that I have this gift. And really what we've learned from then is he just had an incredible mental capacity that I can't even comprehend. But at the time, art was valued more than just about all the other stuff he worked on. And so he had this gift in art during the Renaissance, and he spent a lot of time on all these other little pet projects that, in his mind, I could have done more sculptures. I could have done more paintings, because everything he did was incredible, like the Mona Lisa. And he felt like he wasted it. And so when you kind of hear and you think about Da Vinci and you hear a quote like that, how does that make you think about your career or others' careers?
It's funny, and it's kind of like we talked about with Hank Aaron. The first thing I realized as a 45-year-old is I can't understand what he was thinking. And what a tormented place. I'm actually kind of, speaking of not having regrets, I'm thrilled that I don't feel that way. But people aren't going to travel to Richmond, Virginia 500 years from now and see what I've done with my life. I'm going to go away and it's just going to be gone. But I think there's torment that comes into greatness in art. And that's the thing I think about. Um, so it's so unrelatable. What
Yeah.
if you said, if you could wish anything for Leonardo, what would it be? It's to just show the sheer joy that 5 centuries later, his tinkerings, how close he was. But that's the part of it. Like it's tormenting.
It's the same, you know, you see it with composers, you see it with Michelangelo was the same. So Michelangelo focused a lot more on his sculptures, but it's pretty famous that he was forced into doing the Sistine Chapel and he hated every minute of it. And it wasn't just that laying on your back for hours a day, sweating, you know, that the Sistine Chapel would be a miserable project to do, period. I don't even like to paint a fence, you know, to have to paint that ceiling. It's incredible, but he thought he wasted 3 years of his life doing the Sistine Chapel. It took away from doing more projects like David, which is what he thought his real calling was. And Sistine Chapel, probably 6 or a half dozen, you know, from David on most famous things he's done. It's incredible if you've ever seen it. But yet, while he was doing it, he was tortured and he thought he was wasting time. One thing I take away from this, Frank, is I think a lot of people, they get an occupation early, right? So what did you do first out of Florida? You built houses. You're a project manager.
That's right.
Right? How many people start building houses as a project manager and 5 years later, they're still building houses and they've defined themselves for literally don't think there's anything else the rest of their career.
So I'm glad you're going this way with it, because like being Hank Aaron or being Michelangelo or Leonardo is so freaking abstract. But this is where we can control our destiny. I remember coming out of the University of Florida, I had a degree in construction management, which is kind of a cross between architecture and civil engineering. And all I knew is everybody, I saw a few things in interviewing with companies. If you worked at a commercial construction company, I thought you were arrogant. I thought you were not a great communicator. And I thought your hours sounded miserable. And I thought there's no way I'm going to have any fun doing that. I remember looking at different home builders, and I looked at a couple of home builders, and I went to Ryan Homes in Northern Virginia, and they promoted a work-life balance. They promoted, we hire people with no construction experience. They talk about if you're really good at this, there's a ladder and you can progress. And then I went to a company in South Florida, which is where I lived, and it was 6 o'clock on Saturday. And the office was 60% full at 6 o'clock on Saturday. And all I could think was, if I'm going to get ahead of these people, I got to work Sunday too. So what I remember being at 22 and 23 was honest. I'm not good enough, or I don't want that life. Like, that looks miserable. What I want to do is I want to be able to dictate, and I want to stand out. They're never going to erect a statue for me. I've come to terms with that. But the things that I could do, I knew that if I put myself in the right place, I could do well. I could have a life I liked, and I could build something that I wanted. And I knew early, I couldn't articulate it when I was in my 20s like I can now, but I knew what to avoid. And that's the things that I think these poor guys that are geniuses just can't.
Yeah. And I think they have regrets because they didn't focus on one thing. I think that was the common knowledge then, is become a blacksmith, get really good at it, blacksmith your whole life, then teach your kid to do that. Like, have an occupation. That's how things worked then. And that mentality is still there. We worked for the same home builder, but I worked in the mortgage industry. You have no idea how many people that were like, you can't get out. Once you're in mortgage, you're in mortgage. And the reason is it pays really well. But you don't run into a lot of people that find joy in being in mortgages, right? Or financing or in building houses. They just defined themselves early, and they were beginners once, but they didn't want to be beginners the rest of their career. And, I find that people that do incredibly well in their careers, that make a lot of money, are not afraid to just be beginners all the time. And that doesn't mean you have to start a company, but you're willing to learn. The people that made the most money, even in big companies, they were project managers, and they were like, I want to learn sales. I want to learn marketing. I want to go learn finance. I'll be an analyst. I'll go do that. They were always thinking about being more well-rounded, and then they could add more value to that organization. But it's the same if you're not in a big company. The more things you are still a builder. You could
Yeah.
still go project manage a house all by yourself without anyone on your team.
Yes.
Fact?
Yes.
You've not lost that.
Nope.
That's not something you do on a regular basis anymore. So you wouldn't let yourself become defined as that. You were a project manager and I'm this, and I'm a manager, and I'm good at finance, and I'm good at lending money, and I'm an executive coach. You just keep saying and throughout your career. And the more you can say and stack skills, the more money you can make, the more your career goes. If you limit yourself and say, well, I'm just a medical sales rep, well, that's all you're ever going to be. But you could be a sales rep and something else. And a lot of people stop at that. They think they have to define themselves early.
So people that I know that are the happiest feel like they have free will. And people that I know that are the least happy feel like they do not. And it's perception on both sides of it. It very much is. You and I are different about what we worry about, how we handle things, how we reflect. But one thing we've always done is we've taken control of our lives, our careers, and we've always wanted to be striving for something else. We wanted to get into a role, we wanted to do great with it, but we were always willing to go to the next role or try something new, even though we knew we could be colossal failures. I quit a lucrative job to build this business, and for 5 to 7 years, I felt like a colossal failure. Like, what a huge mistake. But on the other end of it, I felt challenged, I felt pushed, I felt alive while I was doing it. And then when I got to the other side, the reward was incredible. So there's an honesty to it. And the way that I kind of look at life is being born when we were being born. It's very different than being born in the 1300s or 1400s like these two guys. Apprenticeships are gone. The speed of implementation is faster. You get to pick. And that's the whole point of what we're talking about here is you get to set your own arc. And if you are going along a path long enough and it makes you unhappy, it's probably time that you're honest about it and you change. And it's up to you to do it because no one else is going to do it for you.
If the people in my network that knew me, if you'd asked them, like, what's he in 2003, he'd be like, oh, he's an industrial equipment salesman. Does anyone who knows me think of me that way? That's who I was at the time. Right. Oh, he's an industrial sales guy. Yeah, he's real good at it too. He sells some engineered stuff.
I want to jump in right here and say this. Who gives one shit what other people think of you? Yeah. It's up to you to think what it is about you. Yeah. Hank Aaron doesn't care what we think of him. Leonardo and Michelangelo are long since dead. But the point is, most people in life are fucking miserable. I don't care what you think of me. It's my life, not yours. And I have little hurdles in front of me that I set. The reason why, like when people ask me, like, what do you regret? They're very few. They're very, very, very few. And if I'm being incredibly honest, it's very few. And if you said, Frankie, come up with 5 regrets, I probably can't come up with 5, Ian, because everything that's happened in my life, I've turned into something better. Me at my absolute worth, pole vaulted me to something better. And that's why we're both on the other side of this thing, looking back at it, talking about it, is because it's a mindset and it's not going to define me. And I'm going to get better, and it's going to just be something that's spring for. Who knows what'll come around that next corner because of that setback.
But it's fascinating how much people struggle to think that we are capable of anything we want. So even within the first 6 months after leaving NVR, I'd have people saying, like, so what would you do next? You're going to go be a president of a mortgage company for another builder? And I'd be like, God, no, that sounds, I'm never going to work in that space again. If I have my saying is same as you used to tell people, my goal is not to ever put a suit on and interview again the rest of my life, because it was like, I've done that. What's the next chapter? Because that's not defining me. That's not going to be every chapter of my life. That was one chapter of my life. I learned a lot. I had fun. It's something I grew from. I'm ready to go learn something else and be a beginner again.
When it comes to your career, I really feel this way. I don't think you have to have the aspirations that Ian and I have to quit jobs, build businesses, become an author like Ian is. You don't have to do that. but you need to feel like you're growing. If you feel like you're not growing, even if you never progress past, my mom was a school teacher her whole career. She always felt like she was making a difference. She always felt like she was growing. She always felt like she was getting better. And she's the happiest person I've ever met in my life. So it doesn't matter how you corral that, but to me, it comes down, regrets have a lot to do with not growing. And it's up to you to figure out how to do that inside of your life, your career. That's what it is.
Love it. So moving on to our next example, Princess Leia and Han Solo. We're going to talk about. So Carrie Fisher played Princess Leia. She was 19 years old when she took that part. So very new in her career. So when we talk about defining yourself by one thing, she took that role, and obviously an iconic role. We were introduced to Carrie Fisher with buns on the side of her head as a princess, and obviously Star Wars blew up, and then we got more of the princess in Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. That's what she did. That's how she was known on that circuit for years. And she was quoted years later, and somewhere in her 60s, on a TV show. Her quote was, "If I had known how popular Star Wars would have been, I would never have done it. All I did when I was really famous was wait for it to end." And you think about that, and you can relate to it in one aspect. Once you are defined in the public eye as something, she was defined as Princess Leia. It makes it hard for people to see you as anything else. It makes it hard for someone to take you seriously in a different role, because all they can see you as is having those buns on the side of your head. But what's fascinating is, why didn't that happen to Harrison Ford? Harrison Ford, for 5 years, just the same as Carrie Fisher, was Han Solo. But what else did Harrison Ford do? He was Indiana Jones. He did The Fugitive. He did Blade Runner. He was so many other iconic characters that didn't seem to hold him back. You don't hear Han Solo saying, you don't hear Harrison Ford saying, "I wish I wouldn't have done it because it held my career back." He just went and did the next thing. So what I get from that is, being defined at a certain point in your career, that's your mindset. That's your mindset. That's not someone else's.
So we were going to talk about some fun stuff with this. And I'm a nerd for Star Wars, and I kind of love it. And like Star Wars 3, 4, 5, and 6, the originals, and then there was the prequels, and then they dusted Carrie Fisher off and they brought her back. Like, she made that quote somewhere between the height of the stuff in the late 70s and early 80s, and then in the 2010s when they rebooted it. And I think, Ian, we didn't talk about this, but I think it comes back to this. Harrison Ford had higher self-confidence. And maybe it was justified, maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was more talented. I don't know the answer. But do you know what the Peter Principle is?
Sure.
Can you explain it succinctly?
So the Peter Principle is, it was a book written, and it was a satire book. It was actually meant to be a joke, but it was a book written about a guy who had noticed a phenomena in business, and that people get promoted until they reach a certain level that they shouldn't have been promoted to, and it becomes clear to everyone that they've reached too far. So the Peter Principle, in essence, just means there is a certain level everyone can attain, and that's it. So it's largely satire, but if you look around most companies, you find it. People get promoted. They're a supervisor, then they're a office manager, then they're a district manager, and they get to regional and they blow up, and it doesn't work. Their intelligence isn't there. Their skill set doesn't fit anymore. So there is a level. The Peter Principle is just, there is a level everyone reaches that was one step too far.
So let's go back to Star Wars. Luke and Leia. Their Peter Principle was Luke and Leia. The best they could get. They got cast young. They had a superstar concept, movie, producer, everything, and they get elevated. Harrison Ford was way better than Han Solo, even though he was incredible as Han Solo. And he was in American Graffiti before he was ever in Star Wars. He was already a star. He was the one star. And he kind of looked at it and said, this will not define me. I'm better than this. And he pushed past it. But if you look, Carrie Fisher also had a huge drug problem in the 80s. She kind of got into the hype and didn't push herself past it and kind of allowed the Peter principle to stall her. Mark Hamill is an awesome actor in that series, but most of the stuff he does is voice acting. He's a voice actor. So he had this one thing. So this is what I hate about just the human psyche. Instead of looking at it and going, holy shit, what a ride I'm on. You don't like it and you hate it and you want it to end. And then it ends and 20 years goes by and you look back and say, man, I wish I had that again. That's where doubt and unhappiness comes from. One of the things that Ian and I talk about a lot, and we're going to talk about this at the end, I was raised in a very different way than Ian. I would look at something and say, and I'm not this way nearly as much now, but in my 20s and in my 30s for sure, I used to be incredibly fit. I had abs, and I have not had abs in decades. And I would look at someone with abs 10, 15 years ago, and I'd be like, man, look how fit that person is. And Ian would be like, who cares, Frankie? He's going to go home and have ramen. You and I are eating steak. And he celebrated that. And that was one of the reasons we became such good friends. We had different perspectives on the same thing. Carrie Fisher had this rocket ride, and she didn't enjoy it. And that sucks because it's over.
Yeah, and I think it's the reason why there's more one-hit wonders than there are Rolling Stones.
I was going to bring that up too.
Because I think when you have success really early in your life, it's easy to say, I don't think it can get better than this.
That's right.
And it's a really scary, that only happened to me one time in my life. And that was right when I left NBR because there was a big payout, a very big payout. And it was easy for me in my mind to be like, did I just peak? Did I just hit the top of the mountain? And you have to fight that. You have to, in your mind, say, you know what? Be happy, embrace it. That's an incredible accomplishment. Money shouldn't be the peak. The peak should be, you should always be thinking of the peak as the next accomplishment, something you're proud of, because there are some things I've done since that have nothing to do with money that I'm more proud of than that money, than whatever I walked away and cashed out of. And I've got some things ahead of me right now that I'm way more excited about than what I did in big companies. But I had to fight that, Frank. And I think most people have to fight it too. And especially if you have success early. And I think you mentioned it. Carrie Fisher was how much younger, Frank? 13 years? Was she 13 years younger than Harrison Ford when she did that? So maybe it was his maturity.
Seems about right. Yeah, it was a decade plus.
So you think it's confidence? You think it's a confidence situation that Harrison Ford he had done other things and he knew he could do them again. And so this was a stop. So he had more confidence than she did. She thought, at 19, oh my God, I'm on every billboard around the world. You think that's it? Or she just thought, I can't possibly beat this. Whereas he was like, well, whatever.
So I'm Googling something because I wanted to bring up a point. And you had talked about one-hit wonders. And I don't know what it is for Carrie Fisher. I don't have a good enough history of her life. I don't know, but I can tell you this. One of the things that I have noticed with happiness is it usually comes down to enjoying the process and the grind. And I think Harrison Ford had more grind in him than Carrie Fisher did. And maybe he was older, maybe it was something else. One of my favorite artists is Tom Petty. And one of my favorite songs by Tom Petty is a song called Into the Great Wide Open. And Into the Great Wide Open, it's a story. And in that story, and this is what I was looking up when you were talking about that, in that story, this couple finds like random success. He becomes a one-hit wonder and he starts to party. And he puts out his second album while he's partying and loving life. And there's a line in there. It says, their A&R man said, I don't hear a single. They hadn't even realized it, but it was over. It was over. But like you too, like them, dislike them, they grind. Every album takes 3 or 4 years. There's a process. It's repeatable. It goes on over and over. I can tell you that I think Harrison Ford had better chops. He knew he had better chops, but he also enjoyed the process, got into the process, could get into roles better. He was believable. Like when Harrison Ford was Indiana Jones, I did not think Chewbacca was going to show up. But whenever I saw Carrie Fisher in something else, I wondered when she was going to come in with the buns in her hair.
Yep.
She couldn't
Yep.
compel me the same way. But I
Yeah.
think so.
But
Does
that's a
that,
mindset. I don't think that's a skill. I think that was a mindset that got stuck in, that I've reached the top, I can't do better, and that's who I am. And she let it define her, right? And instead of breaking through that mindset and trying different things, because a lot of people can do that. It's not that her destiny was not set until she made her mind up that it was. That was a mindset.
I don't disagree with that, but kind of like we started off with Hank Aaron. Like there's a grinding process to this, and there is a holding yourself accountable piece. And and we don't know her, but to me, for people who are listening to this, you want to build a career, you want to build a business. Hank Aaron, I think, probably had a lot of process behind what he did. What I see with this particular example with Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford is, to me, Harrison Ford was more talented. I don't know if it was God given. I don't know if it was belief. I don't know if it was process, but it's probably some combination of all three of those. And that's what propelled him forward, in my opinion.
Fair enough. So we started to get into it a little bit. I think, I've known you now for over a decade, and you and I are wired a little different. So I think the question I want to dig into a little bit more here is the capacity to move on, the ability, which is a skill, I think, the ability
I agree.
to kind of just drop what's happened in the past, learn from it a little bit, but move on, don't emotionally dwell, right? So to move on from failures or mistakes or things that you could have done better, do you believe that's a learned skill, or is that a inherent talent that we're born with?
So I think you're born with something, and I think you're built with that, and maybe how you're raised. My parents are both warriors. My parents are both perfectionists. My parents are both people who have accomplished, but have accomplished to a point. And I think with growth comes an ability to realize good and bad that you've seen in life and being able to grow past it. You kind of talked about blacksmiths and apprenticeship earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the beauty of being alive in the 21st century. We got YouTube, we got training videos. If you want to figure something out that you think that you want to change, you can. And I think you can vehemently argue either side of that, Ian, and I think you could put together a winning argument, but I think it comes down to choice.
Part of the reason why I asked this is just in the time I've known you, you've grown a ton in this area. You used to strike me as a big time worrier and someone who overly focused on opinions of others, and a lot of times it was imagined opinions of others. It wasn't even you were stressing about something someone said or did. It was what they might perceive of you or what they might think about how something happened. And I've seen you. I bring this up because I've seen you become a different person where you don't. And is that you needed more notches on your belt? You needed more successes? Or is that just you got a little older and more mature and you grew?
When did you see it? Like if I could ask you, because I'm curious what you think the catapult was, or how did you see it change?
Because I saw you like that at NVR, and I saw you that after NVR for 5-6 years. I'd say in the last few years, it's not been a long time that I've felt Frank doesn't really dwell much on anything anymore. He just kind of moves to whatever's next. I think it's been a short period of time in the time I've known you that you've not been much of a dweller.
I don't know. I would answer it this way. I would think, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole too much, but I'll talk about it a little bit. you said in here somewhere that you were talking about your sales career, and you were talking a little bit about like your results, and you said something about no one really cares anyways. And I don't know where the shift happened, but the shift happened for me that people don't really give a shit about me. People really care about themselves. People don't really realize what I'm doing or not doing. All they really care about is what's happening or not happening for them. And when I figured that out, I kind of realized, wow, there's a lot of freedom and space out here that I don't have to worry about this crap. And there's a handful of moments that I think kind of got me there. Like this is the rabbit hole. I built a house during the last recession. The person who bought it from me, the septic system failed, and they just ginned up a lawsuit and they sued me for 15 million bucks. And I thought I was going to die. Like, I did not know how I was going to get through it. I felt like a terrible, insignificant human who just didn't deserve to live for a period of time. It was fucking miserable is the only way I can put it. Yeah. My wife says I went through a period of depression, and I don't like to use that term, but I think I did. And I didn't get help. I'm a meathead. I just tried to figure it out. But when I figured out that, you know what, screw this. If there was a mistake, I did everything I could to rectify it. And not only that, I paid for it. It cost me over $1 million. On the other side of that, I said, okay, that wasn't terribly enjoyable, but I got my sense of smell back. I got my sense of feeling back. And in the end, nobody really gave a shit about the fact that I went through that.
Or like no one knew.
Yeah. And even people who did, like, they didn't show up with envelopes of cash or put their arms around me. It was very quiet. It was one of those things where you just kind of realize, even when something is public or private, it comes down to you and how you interpret it. And I think getting to the other side of that gave me the ability to just say, you know what, mistakes are going to happen. They don't define you. Build a moat, figure out how to be strong. And at the same time, let it bounce off you, because the more resilient you are to crap, the better you're going to be prepared to go further. And I think that's what it was for me.
I remember, so I got a funny anecdote on this. So when I left NVR and semi-retired, just kind of tried to figure out what I was going to do. I didn't have an office to go to anymore. And I've been going to an office for 20 years, with one of two companies. So I knew my routine, and I knew that I thought everyone in my neighborhood knows that Ian just kind of leaves at 6 something in the morning and leaves when it's dark and comes back when it's dark. So I remember saying this to Jenny, and I don't know how it got brought up, but I told my wife, I said, I just got to go somewhere. I got to go to a coffee shop. I don't want the neighbors asking why, like, Ian's truck's in the driveway all the time. And she was like, do you think they give a shit about do you think they're paying attention? Like, they give a shit about your truck being in the, I bet they won't even notice. I'm like, oh, they'll notice. And I remember, like, this is 3 months later. I like the first month I went to a coffee shop every day. Then, like, for 2 months, I kind of worked out of the house. So my truck was there all the time. And I hadn't talked to any of the neighbors. It was winter. It was like January, February, March. None of us come out. We kind of hang out in the summer. This was like April. And I'm like, I brought it up to one of them. And they're like, oh, you left MBR? This is like 4 months later. They had no idea that I wasn't, they didn't notice that my truck was there all day. They didn't notice that I wasn't going to my office in Reston every day. They didn't give a shit. They had their own problems with their business. I think it kind of goes to show, just to your point, people care about themselves. They're not thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. You're just not significant to anybody. And especially the people that you're normally worried about their opinions, you're really not significant to them. Like, there aren't people out there actively rooting against you and following everything you do so that they can, that's made up in your mind. It's not even real.
I think, do I wish I had the body I did in my 20s? Do I wish my knees didn't hurt? Do I wish I could run as fast? Yeah. But Would I trade where I am now for that? No. And the reason is there's a peace and an ability to think and enjoy. And like, if I'm ever harsh on myself, I think about things I might have missed because I was stuck in my own head. Like, how many great things did I miss because I was worried about other crap? And there's tons of it. Like, I'm married, you're married, we have kids. Like, being a dad and being a husband is hard. Like, if you focus on the parts that suck, it's awful. Like, you're going to drink. But if you focus on those couple of laughs you get, or when your wife puts her arm around you and says, you're a great dad, like, thank you. Like, those are the moments that propel you. And you have to just forget about the crap and just realize it. And
you got to embrace them. You got to enjoy it. You got to remind yourself, we're wrapping up around here, but we both love Frank Sinatra, and his, in my way, he's got just a classic line, which is, regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. And it's one of my favorite song lyrics ever. I just love it. It gives me perspective every time I hear it. And one, just the fact that he's saying too few to really mention. One, he's saying it's not worth me thinking about it, but he's also saying, I'm not going to mention it because you wouldn't give a shit about my regrets, because no one else really cares. No one cares about your complaints, your gripes, your regrets, anything. So I'm not going to even mention it because I'm doing it my way anyway. And I think that's great perspective, Frankie, in that I remember being in high school, and I remember being really stressed out in the state playoffs and telling my dad I was stressed out. And he was like, do you have any idea how much I would love to be on that field tomorrow in the batter's box one more time? Like, you go up there with a smile on your face. I remember just thinking that. I remember, like, every at bat after that, I had a big ass shit-eating grin on my face. I'm in the state playoffs. This is amazing. And it was one of the best streaks I was on. I mean, I was hitting the ball really well because I was just not in my head. I was just trying to enjoy every moment. And I do that now when I coach. I do that now. If I'm stressed about lineups or something's going on, I'll be like, it's Little League Baseball. Get out here and have some fun. Just embrace being out here with your son and his friends and just enjoy the hell out of it. Because everyone you talk to who has ever coached youth sports, whose kids have grown up, will tell you, you embrace it. Those are some of the best days of my life. And, your quote always that you say to Max is what? What's your favorite quote?
These are the good old days, pal.
These are the good old days. And it's really easy. Cats in the cradle. And it's really easy to look back and miss everything because you're focused on the bullshit. When the truth is, these are the good old days. Every day, these are the good old days. You embrace the fun, just like you and I are embracing doing a crappy nascent podcast, which one day may or may not become something important. But we got to enjoy it. It's fun. It's fun. You got to enjoy things.
So what I think about in this moment is this: if you're not enjoying stuff, you need to. And in addition to that, if you're ever a manager of other people, the best thing you can do is just remind them of the little thing. Everybody worries about what do other people think of them, even though you say you don't. But if you pick up little things on people and you just compliment them or tell them it's a great job, you never know how far that's going to go. Like, we do a team call, Ian, and Fridays are kind of longer days. Like, we do a fun team activity, and we've got parts of our business that were just broken 4 months ago that are great. And what I'll do from time to time is I'll link a few things together and just say, this department was broken. This wasn't happening. We had a bunch of service tickets. Let me just show you why this happened. We hired Vince, who's our headhunter. He went out and recruited these 7 people. Those 7 people went into this system that we had built, but it wasn't great. And now that we've added a few people, everybody in that system is better because Vince found them. Derek came in, and boom. We need to celebrate the fact that we had 40 work tickets in the system 60 days ago, and now we're at 2. Awesome job.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Celebrating the little things. So I think I'm going to end this podcast by saying that I brought my 2-month-old puppy into the office today to do this podcast. And in the time we've been talking, I want some kudos from you right now. I have not let you know that he pissed, and there is a big log of crap on the carpet in my office, which is small, smells like puppy poop, and I didn't even blink. And I'm not gonna have any regrets for bringing this dog in, because there's got to be a goddamn lesson that I learned from putting this puppy in here who's been pooping and peeing all over. And God bless her. You know, I should've taken her out, but she's been sitting here listening to you and I ramble. She's like, I gotta go. You're not gonna shut up and take me out. I'm doing it live. I'm going right here.
Do you know why you have no regrets? You rent.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, dude, let's wrap this one up. Good seeing you, Frankie.
Good talking, brother.
No regrets.
None.
See you, dude.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.